a lot of really cool information, not the least of which is I can look at any variable right there without having to throw in die statements or whatever, and then you can do a bunch of stuff. You can check, you can step through the code, and all this other stuff.
How would you do it if it was remote?
What's that?
The debugger is reading what, your local web page, or is it looking at a remote session?
You can. I haven't played much with remote debugging, but you can do it remotely on some systems.
Right.
But
because assuming
normally, if you're doing a lot of development, you normally would be developing locally and then deploying it.
Right now, the reason why I ask is not everyone's, people, especially in the beginning, may not be doing it locally.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, this is more advanced, obviously more advanced stuff. Okay, so let's see. So, any questions about this? The main point is here. It's kind of like a surgeon or something that gets his assistants to get everything ready. The decision's been made, and all he does is walk in and make the one little and says, "Okay, I'm done," and he leaves. And that's kind of what this plugin's doing, right? Everything else, there's a lot of stuff to get to this point. There's a lot of stuff after this point, but all this guy's doing is a little bit of stuff. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So let's look at the next example here. This one's really cool because there is a new event in. We're going to look at my registration too now. And this uses a new event that was added. In 1.6, we added an important new class in the platform called JForm. Anybody familiar with, people have heard of JForm? It's basically used to render most of the forms in the back end, and then some of the forms on the front end as well. And it's designed to be really flexible and really easy to extend and modify. And one of the ways that you can extend and modify a JForm form is with a plugin. Okay? So this is the XML file. It looks almost identical to the other one. Again, we use the same kind of naming convention. And again, in real life, you'd want to namespace that with your URL or something. And again, it has to match. Now here, we've got a few more files. We've got a forms folder and a language folder, so we can actually do some translation stuff. And we've added a parameter here. Okay. So when we go into the plugin manager for this guy, we actually will have a parameter that we can set that will change the way that the plugin works. Okay. Any questions about that? Let's go to the code. Is that print big enough, by the way? Can everybody read that? So again, this is all standard. We define the thing, we import the plugin, we name our thing, extending the J plugin. That's exactly the same as the other example. And here, again, we don't have a heck of a lot of code, do we? So this event is on content prepare form. And we've got two things to work with. We've got a form variable, which is a JForm object, and then we've got data, which is an object, an array holding all of the form data. We don't use that in this example. And again, what's the first thing we do? First thing we do is say, where the heck are we? And is this the place I want to be? And if not, I get the heck out of Dodge. Right? So in this case, we're using the form getName method to get the name of the form. And if it's not a COM user's registration form, then I don't have any work to do. So I just return. Again, this is really important to do in most plugins because you're going to be fired in all kinds of places where you don't have anything to do. So the first thing to do is to figure out, am I where I think I ought to be? So at this point now, we know we're in a COM users registration form. This is where it gets kind of cool. So we load the language, that's just so we can do nice translations, so JM doesn't get mad at me. I do an example without translations. Then this is the really cool thing here. JForm has methods that let you change the form before you show it out, display it out to the user. So if we're talking now about the user registration form. Okay, so the standard user registration form is this part, this top part, right? Right? That looks familiar, the top part? But these bottom two ones don't look familiar. These guys come from our little plugin. So let's go back and see how that works, right? So what we're using here is a load file method from JForm to load an XML file, which in that case just adds that fields that are defined in that XML file onto the end of our form. Our form is in memory at this point, but it hasn't been displayed out to the user. So in this case, we are modifying that form. So we're loading the XML file. And then the way JForm works is you've got an XML file available, and then you can display different fields off that XML file. So so those fields at this point, the fields are added from the XML file, and then we check our parameter. We added a parameter to say do we want to show the age or not, and if we say we don't want to show the age, then we use the remove field of JForm to just remove that field so that when it's rendered out, it doesn't happen. Yeah?
Is this saved in the parameters of that user then?
No. This is a parameter for the plugin,
Where is
not
the
for the
data
user.
that the user fills out saved?
Oh, that goes into the user table.
In the parameter?
Not.
In the parameter field of the user table? Or does it make new?
No, this is the program here. Let's see.
Mark?
Yeah.
I think what you might want to know is how are those initial fields created? So that would be in the XML install file.
XML file.
Are those saved in that field for parameters in that user record? In the user table?
No, this is okay. The let's.
Suppose you're asking for that user's age and phone number or something that's not on that profile.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a different. Yeah, okay. I see what.
I want to know where it's being saved. If you're
Right.
asking for this information.
If you were in this example, that information is not being saved. Okay. In this example, this isn't a user. There's a core plugin that's available called User Profile.
Right, I saw that.
Right, and those would be values there are saved
In another table. I saw that.
right,
But I was
right.
just wondering if.
In this example here, this is just in the form. It's not being it's a checkbox. It's not being. This is just something that's being rendered on the form. It's not a data type that's been added to the data.
Would that be another plugin?
Yeah, I mean you certainly could, or you could add. You have to have a table or place to put that. Right. But yeah, you can easily.
But does it say in like the parameters field of that user?
It's strange, the plugin doesn't look like it belongs to the form. That's what's confusing.
Well, let's go in here and look at that. Maybe it'll be clearer if we look at these.
You're just collecting the data and not doing anything on the submitted.
It's just like,
Yeah, you're not
What is
collecting
it?
really data.
Is it really the fact?
In this case, we're not really collecting data, we're just making, the business use case here, maybe that's what's confusing.
It's a hello world plugin.
The use case here is to make sure that the user has checked a box before they submit something. So it's not data that we're interested in saving.
Like you read the disclaimer.
Yeah, exactly. So there isn't, but you're right. I mean, in some cases, you might want to save something, in which case it would be a different type of situation.
And this is so it's a validation example, like the
Exactly.
XL knows that it has to be checked before.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get to
Doesn't
that.
get registered if it's not checked.
Yeah, so so basically the key thing, the takeaway thing here is we're able to manipulate the entire JForm inside this plugin. Okay, so anything in Joomla core where we're using a form, you can write a plugin to add or subtract or change the attributes of any field in those forms with a plugin. I mean, is that cool or what?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not hard. So let's look at how this works.
Does this prevent the registration if they do not check the box?
Yeah,
It's
well, yeah,
required.
yeah. In fact, let me show
Sure
you.
it is.
Let's do that. Yeah. So.
Nice.
See, so, okay, so the other piece of this is this is the XML file that we included in here, right? That we loaded with the this load file went to forms XML, right? So this is a JForm XML file, and you'll see examples of these all throughout the core. You got form, and then inside form you got field set, and then inside field set you got fields, and then these are two fields, right? And we set required equals true, and that tells JForm that these have to be required. That and since it's a checkbox, it just means it has to be checked. And again, initially we included both these fields, but then we said, okay, if that parameter is not set, let's remove this one. But there are also methods in JForm to add attributes, delete attributes, change the value of attributes. You can add fields just with a string as opposed to with an XML file. You can, so you could basically do all kinds of stuff to change this form before you render it. Okay, so it's a very, very powerful feature that was added in 1.6. Yeah.
How the XML is set up here, does that change depending on versions from 1.5, 1.6, and 1.7?
Well, this is wall 1.6, 1.7. This didn't exist in 1.5.
The value attribute on the XML field,
Yeah.
value equal 1, is that because it's required? If it's not 1,
I don't even know what that, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what that does on a checkbox. I'd have to play with it.
The value is written when the box is true.
Yeah,
Oh,
one is
okay.
true.
Let's
One is
just
true.
substitute true
One-
value.
Okay.
one's true.
Yeah. Right, and since we're not using that because we're not saving that, we're just requiring that it be checked. And
so
then
does that even matter then? Does value even?
I don't,
Say true. You probably could say true, and it would be fine.
yeah, it probably just has to be anything other than 0.
Okay.
I would guess. I'd have to play with it to know. I don't know
off the.
In that example, you could say agreed, and you would write the word agreed to the data
Right,
instead of the value one.
right, and we're not using that value anyway, and we're not saving it.
Gotcha. Just required.
Yeah, we're just using it as a hurdle that somebody has to get over
Okay.
to continue the process. Okay, how are we doing for time?
You had 10 minutes,
Okay,
actually more like 8 now.
okay. So you guys want to see something really dangerous?
Oh, yeah, good.
After we crash our site right before we show the customer.
Real, this is like,
Because that's
really
really
dangerous. Okay, so we're gonna go to the
And then
last
show it to the
example.
customer.
You didn't hear this from me, okay? This part of the thing never happened, okay? I'll deny everything.
You know we're streaming live on the internet.
Oh, right.
So much for that.
Why not have this installed? Oh, there we go. Okay. Now this one is a little different, okay? I mentioned in the talk, I mentioned that you could override just about any for a class using a plugin, right? So now we're going to prove that. With great power comes great responsibility. In other words, don't try this at home. So this is a demonstration just to show you that you really can do this, okay? The key on this is that when we load the platform classes in Joomla, the logic is we don't want to load them multiple times, right? So the logic is always, first of all, check and see if that class is already defined. If it's defined, we don't have to do anything. And if it's not defined, then we load it. Okay? That's the standard logic. So that means if we can sneak our definition in before the normal platform definition would come in, then our version of the class gets loaded and not the standard one. Does that make sense to everybody? And it just so happens that the after initialize event is done before most classes are loaded. There's only very few classes that are loaded at that point in the core. Okay? Now this one's a little different because remember I mentioned earlier that if we declare a class, nothing happens at that moment. All it does is add that class to memory so it's available if I call it. Whereas if we just do a script that doesn't declare a class, those commands are executed immediately, right? Now, what we're doing here is just by defining this as a system plugin, putting it under the systems folder, under my classes, and enabling that, even though we don't have a method, it's going to come down here and load this. Now, normally, that would be a class definition, right? But here, we're just actually running an include statement to load our version of a class in there before Joomla can load its version. Okay, so it's a little tricky there. And then what I've done is in our version of that class, I've just kind of monkeyed with just to be able to prove that it works. I've taken the rebuild and I've kind of killed the rebuild method here. I just do a die, an exit statement. Okay, and that's just to prove that I'm running my version of the class, not the standard one. Okay, so if we go into the back end of Joomla here. That's about how much time I need. So if we go into system plugins here, we've got this plugin system my classes. And if I enable this guy, which again, I wouldn't try this at home. Now, if I go to say the category manager here, I should be running my version of the table nested class, not the standard one, in which case the rebuild here should just crash. Okay. So the point here is that if you do have a situation where you have something where you really need a standard class to do something a little different than what it normally does, this is a preferable method than hacking the thing, because at least you got a plug-in, you can disable it, you're not editing a core file, but you're still getting the benefit of overriding that core class. Does that make sense, everybody? Again, hopefully most of the time you don't need to do something like that, but it just shows you what you can do with plugins. Okay. Yeah.
So in that last example, we could essentially load any external PHP file that way, correct? Because you're using good ones.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you would only use that method if you were trying to override a core class. Otherwise you can, there's a million ways you can include your own code. But if you're trying to override a core class, then if as long as it's not something that's been already loaded at that point in the cycle, which very few things have been loaded on the after initialized part of the cycle. Most things are
In the human example that we did in the beginning, one of the events had 3 plugins,
yes.
and we said you have to determine the order in which they'll load. How
Yes.
do you do that?
Yeah, let's look at that.
And there's some order in the loading in.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Do you know what's in here next? No. Huh? It's on the board, right?
Mark, that was excellent.
What is it? I think it's another. I think it's build a module. I think it's build a.
Thumb drives that were
Yeah.
thumb drives, anyone?
Can't get in here.
Thumb drives. Use this for tomorrow's workshop.
That's your contribution.
Hopefully we'll have interactions.
Somebody's walking around with it sticking off their computer.
Well, that's where the order becomes important.
Oh, I forgot about it.
Because, it's basically whoever, either gets there, depending on how the plug is written.
Sorry, it'll just take longer.
Because it'll just